Matter is everywhere.
It's Nicholas. It's Teresa. It's Darren.
Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and wondered if there's another you on the other side of the mirror? This is the basic idea of antimatter.
Of course, there's no backwards you living in an opposite world.
That'd just be silly.
Imagine an anti-world exactly like ours.
Anti-shoes, anti-rocks, anti-tree.
And even an anti-you.
All of these things would have to be made up of anti-protons, anti-neutrons, and anti-electrons.
Which make up antimatter.
Take a closer look inside.
Protons and neutrons, which are located inside the nucleus, and electrons, which orbit the ball.
The opposite of an electron would be an anti-electron or a positron.
It would be the same for any antiparticle. Anti-neutrons, anti-protons.
Antimatter is the opposite of matter.
Matter and antimatter can be compared to cookie dough and a cookie cutter. If you use a cookie cutter to cut out a piece of dough, what you have in your hand, the dough, is matter, and what is left is antimatter. Now when you put these two back together, you get energy, because energy can be created from matter and antimatter. I'm sure you're wondering who would have thought of a crazy idea like this. It's thought in 1928 by a famous scientist named Paul Dirac.
Paul Dirac was born on August 8, 1902 in Bristol, England, and he died on October 20th, 1984 in Tallahassee, Florida.
He studied electrical engineering at the University of Bristol, completing his degree in 1921. After completing his degree in applied mathematics, he was allowed to study at St. John's College in Cambridge. He pursued his interests in general relativity. His theory was never proved because the technology needed for such an experiment was not available at the time. The first production of antimatter was at CERN, who have only made 1/1,000,000th of a gram. Dirac shared the 1933 Nobel Prize for Physics. Many physicists consider Dirac the greatest physicist of the 20th century. He's one of the founders of quantum mechanics and quantum electrodynamics.
If I say to you tomorrow,
Do you, Paul, take Margaret as your lawfully wedded wife? Do you, Margaret, take Paul as your husband?
Yeah, I do.
You may now kiss the bride.
take you. What's
Antimatter was such a revolutionary discovery that even its discoverer feared its consequences.
It annihilates an ordinary matter, disappearing in a puff of energy. I'm matter, and that's antimatter. And this is inhalation. Ah! What can antimatter be used for?
There are several different uses for antimatter.
The main one being used for hospitals.
Positrons are used to identify different diseases.
Can we use antimatter to propel a car or a spaceship?
In principle, yes, but in practice, it is very difficult.
In reality, making antimatter is so difficult, it probably won't be used for fuel.
Science rules!
Science rules!
Yay!
Go.
So what's for supper, honey?
Nothing. I was just practicing.
Oh, that's kind of weird. So what's for supper, honey?
Nothing. I'm just practicing.
What'd you do today, honey?
I just discovered the theory of antimatter, and I'm also one of the greatest physicists of all time. Not much.
That's nice. Have your eggs.
Do you, Paul, take Margaret to be your lawfully wedded wife?
He studied electrical engineering at the University of Bristol. His theory was never proved because the technology needed for such an experiment was not available at the time. The first production...
Do you mind?
Dirac shared the 1933 Nobel Prize for Physics.
That's stupid.
Matter's everywhere.